So welcome everyone. My name is Andrew Griggs and I'm Senior Partner at Kreston Reeves based in the UK and also a Board Director at Kreston Global. Before we get started on this afternoon's webinar on sustainability, there are a few housekeeping points I would just like to share with you, as hopefully you can see from the screen in front of you. We do have a question and answer session later on in the webinar, so do please share your questions for the panel in the Q&A section at the bottom of the screen. And there is also a chat function at the bottom for any technical support that you may require. Just so that you are aware, the event is being recorded and the recording and presentation will be made available afterwards to all members on Kreston community. So some of you may have seen this morning's event, but if not, you get a chance to see both of them here. So just running through the next hour, there'll be an introduction from myself, and then there'll be a short montage of case study videos. And then we welcome our two panelists, Christina Tsiarta from Kreston ITH in Cyprus and Dan Firmager from Kreston Reeves in the UK, who will both be sharing their insights into their work on sustainability in their respective firms. We'll then have a panel discussion with Q&A. So as I said, do feed your questions through to us. And then there'll be a short video from Treedom on how they're working with Kreston Global before closing remarks. So yes, Kreston Global asked me to chair this session, both as a Kreston Global Board Director, but also somebody who is passionate about sustainability and carbon net zero and heavily involved in our own firm's activities at Kreston Reeves. Kreston want to showcase some of the interesting, varied and pioneering work done by our firms across the network in the rapidly growing area of ESG and sustainability. So why is this important for firms? When the words sustainability or ESG are mentioned, people's first thoughts usually focus on the pressing need for action against climate change and protecting the planet. However, whilst this clearly forms part of sustainability and the E of ESG, we need to search more deeply. Next slide, please. Firms and businesses need to look at developing not only profitable practices with strong governance principles, but also building social capital through the trust and respect of clients, employees, suppliers, and regulators. They need to develop a social license or create oxygen by building purpose into their strategy and plans, as well as demonstrating they exist to benefit multiple stakeholders in society. There is a need for organizations to take the lead. The Kreston firms I speak to around the world talk about the war for talent and need for people. Gen Zs, people who are in their 20s, expect, and this is not a nice to have, but expect firms to have purpose and vision in this area. Clients are also demanding help and support, not only in what they should be doing, but how they can be ready for a new reporting environment. The Global Reporting Initiative, GRI, is an international independent standards body that helps organizations understand and communicate their impact on climate change, human rights, and corruption. As accountants, we need to be ready for a new reporting environment. These standards are coming. So I've set out in the slide there the various areas that firms are looking at in terms of sustainable development goals, ESG, looking at KPIs, all leading to purpose. And here at Kreston Reeves, we've seen how rapidly things are changing in this area. We will talk about our own experience in a minute. I'm sure many of you out there are already on your own journey. We would love to hear more about this. For the firms that haven't yet begun and want to do so, hopefully this will inspire and excite you, as well as give you some ideas about what it all means and how to begin. So what we're aiming to do over the next 45 to 50 minutes is basically, as I said earlier, we're running 2 sustainability webinars today, and we have 4 firms in total that have been featured, 2 this morning and then 2 this afternoon. We will show a short video which showcases some of the work the firms and Treedom are doing in this area of sustainability. We'll then have a panel discussion with the opportunity, as I said earlier, for questions from the audience. In time-honoured fashion, we will ask that you put questions in the Q&A function, and Nicoletta and Tsiarta from Kreston will help me monitor any questions. But before we go on to the video montage from the firms, I'd like to do a short poll and asking you how important is an ESG strategy to your firm on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 not being important and 10 being most important. So hopefully the voting has come up, and I'll be interested to see how and where you all are as firms. So I think we're just gathering the results. Oh, so that's interesting. So there's no score below 6 as to how important an ESG strategy is to the firm. Fascinating. Thank you all very much for sharing that. Let's now move on to the short video montage introducing the work being done by the firm so you can get a flavour of what's going on. As I mentioned, 2 sessions today, so the video montage shows all of the firms, but we only have representatives in this session from 2 of them. Both sessions will be available to watch on demand after today if you want to catch up on anything you have missed.
Hi, I'm Firmager, and an Audit Assistant Manager at Kreston Reeves. Kreston Reeves is a mid-tier professional services firm located in the southeast of the United Kingdom. Our approach to sustainability is very much a journey. It's one we're continuing to learn about. Currently, our sustainability project has led us to be carbon neutral, but with a lot of terminology used in this area, it's worth understanding what this actually means. Carbon neutral is the process of calculating what your carbon emissions are for a year and then paying to offset those emissions using high quality, genuine carbon credits. The other phrase you may hear is net zero. With net zero, you set a science-based strategy to reduce your carbon emissions by 90% by 2050. Carbon neutral is just the beginning for us, and we are conscious that there is more work to be done. That is why our next steps are to work with a group of sustainability experts to help us create a net zero plan and understand what changes we would have to make before committing to the target. In some cases, it has helped to develop a relationship with our clients. We have had more clients ask about our sustainability work to get ideas for their own plans, and they have appreciated knowing they are working with a responsible organisation that puts matters like this at the forefront of their plans. There has been a noticeable change in the way our people are thinking about decisions they make, even down to whether a purchase they are about to make on the firm's behalf is a sustainable option. There is a lot I can say, but I will keep it to 3 pieces of advice. 1. Just start doing something. No matter how small your plans are, you have to start somewhere. 2. I would encourage other firms to do what Kreston Reeves have done for me. They saw I had a passion and have encouraged and mentored me to use that to develop a strategic plan for the firm. 3. Look at other organisations around you and speak to them if you want some advice. Collaboration will be the key to solving the climate crisis. There are some further ahead than others, and that is not something to be disappointed about. It is an opportunity to learn from them and develop your own strategy.
Kreston S&R's ESG initiatives. Kreston S&R, a full-service business consulting firm based in New Delhi, India. A team of over 70 professionals having expertise in the area of business advisory services. And now, much talked about and needed environmental, social and governance services. Kreston S&R has made a good beginning of its ESG journey, which started in 2021. As knowledge partner, Kreston SNR has supported many national and international events on climate change and ESG. One of the biggest such events it supported was the largest ever Summit on Climate Change 2021, held in Delhi in September 2021, an event organized by PhD CCI and Innovation Norway with the support of Government of India. It is also supporting an international summit on climate change scheduled to be held in Bergen, Norway on 30th August 2022. Government of India is seeking greater involvement of the business by introducing regulations. One of the important regulations is mandating top 1,000 companies to issue business responsibility and sustainability report. Seeing the importance of ESG, the corporates have started realizing that going forward for the growth and existence, they need to care for each of three elements of ESG, that is environment, social, and governance. Kreston SNR believes in collaborative efforts for better and bigger results. To have a pool of quality resources with deeper expertise in the field of ESG implementation, it has collaborated with a few expert firms. Kreston SNR has over 40 ESG professionals at its command who have delivered over 100 ESG-related assignments successfully across renewable energy, airport, and infrastructure projects. Kreston SNR, a true ESG enabler, is committed to the cause of sustainable and beautiful planet.
Okay, hello everyone. We are Kreston ACA PAC, a public accounting firm based in Singapore. In the ESG, the environment, the social and the governance factors, the social factor is the most critical. We focus our HR policy on several aspects. The DEI, in terms of diversity, we have got 3 out of 7 females in our partnership at the partnership level. Also from the staff level, we have got almost equal male and female. In terms of equity, we go out of our way to try and narrow the gaps between the highest paid staff and the lowest paid staff. Inclusion. We are very open in terms of our recruitment. We do not discriminate. That's what I think we try and do in terms of the ESG, the S factor for our practice.
Hi everyone, my name is Wee Guang. I, together with Paul, we believe in inculcating the consciousness of the environment in our staff. We have organized campaigns. Last year we organized a campaign to promote green. The younger one are very enthusiastic. This year we just started another campaign on refusing the use of single-use plastic, and it has been really successful as well. So I want to urge everyone in the firm to engage your staff via the E. Finally, the G. In terms of governance, we have adopted audit software, and this audit software reduces the use of paper. Almost all of our partners are right now actually certified by ACCA in terms of sustainability. So that is where we are in terms of sustainability, and I hope this will give you a glimpse into what we do, how we embed sustainability within our culture.
So Kreston ITH was established in the early 90s. It's an audit firm based in Nicosia, Cyprus. Mid-tier size firm specializing in audit, tax, advisory, and recently ESG.
Kreston ITH has, since its establishment, been focusing on its corporate social responsibility. This commitment has organically evolved beyond just corporate philanthropy into the firm recognizing the importance of identifying and managing its ESG impact. Our approach to embedding sustainability is typically a four-stage process. We start off with a gap analysis to identify data gaps and compliance needs for a client. We then move on to materiality assessment to understand which of these data needs and compliance needs are material. We then move on to developing an ESG strategy that's tailored to the client's needs. And finally, we help clients report on the actions they have taken on ESG.
By promoting ESG services to our clients, we have identified that they have been able to improve their operational efficiencies, resulting in decreased operational cost. They have been able to attract high caliber staff and clients. They have improved their relationship with stakeholders, and they have enhanced their brand value. Much like our clients, by implementing and managing our ESG impact, we have managed to reduce operational cost and improve relationship with our stakeholders.
Our advice for firms first starting out is to identify and understand what your ESG threats are that can hinder the ability of your organization to operate and grow sustainably. For us, sustainability is a journey. It starts with small steps in the right direction and ultimately becomes a way of being.
So fantastic. What great examples of how and why firms are incorporating sustainability as a business, as an employer, but also as a service. So we've seen four firms from Kreston Global and how they are operating it. I now want to hand over to Christina from Kreston ITH, who's going to talk to us more about what their firm are doing. Christina.
Great. Thank you so much, Andrew, and welcome everyone. Good afternoon. I'm very happy to be presenting on Sustainability Day on behalf of Kreston ITH. I've personally been involved in sustainability consulting for over 13 years, so it's exciting to see the accounting world also engaging with all these issues now. So the way I've structured my presentation today, I focused on how we usually approach the issues with our clients. So I want to start off with some key definitions. So I've chosen to start off with sustainable development, which is defined as the development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Now, this is a very popular definition. You may be familiar with it. It comes from the Brundtland Report in 1987. But since then, it's sort of evolved into sustainability having over 300 definitions. It's sort of an umbrella term. It can mean anything and it can mean nothing, which is why with our clients, we like to set a scope of what it means for them. So here at Kreston ITH, for us, sustainability means, there we go. Let me just back up. The framework to make an organization responsible on a number of areas, whether that's the environmental impact of the organization, how it approaches issues such as human rights, community issues, its operating practices, its labor practices, how it tackles organizational governance, how it deals with its clients. And a very useful tool for us in framing that is the ISO 26000. Some of you may be familiar with it. It's the International Standard on Social Responsibility. And the reason we like to use it in framing our scope is because, as you can see in the diagram here, it has 7 core subjects which underpin what it calls sustainability. So you can see there's organizational governance, there's human rights, there's labor practices, environment, fair operating practices, consumer issues, and community involvement and development. And these topics cover a range of areas under which you can sort of assess an organization and see how sustainable it is. And tied to that are the ESG criteria. So for us, the ESG criteria are criteria that can make the efforts of an organization pertaining to sustainability measurable and quantifiable. So to give you an example, if we were to set a criterion for the environment subject, it would be an example is what percentage of electricity that's consumed by an organization comes from renewable sources. Or for consumer issues, it would be what are the number of complaints that are resolved within 5 working days. So these criteria allow us to assess how sustainable an organization is, but also see how well it's improving on its performance. So once the definitions are out the way, usually clients need to understand why ESG and sustainability is important. And it's great to see that all of you have rated that an ESG strategy for your organization is of importance 6 and above. That's great. There are many drivers for why organizations choose to engage with these issues. The first and most important being compliance with regulations, particularly as more and more legislation is appearing in this field. It's also a great way to identify any inefficiencies in your operating practices. And by decreasing these inefficiencies, you may be able to also decrease your operating costs. Another important driver is improving transparency and accountability with stakeholders. So Andrew touched on this, your social license to operate. More and more organizations need to have a good relationship, a transparent relationship with their stakeholders. It's also a great risk management tool. By engaging with these issues, you are able to identify and mitigate and be proactive about all your risks, and therefore lead to increased returns and an overall enhancement to your brand value, to your brand as an organization. And last but not least, an important driver is being able to attract and retain high caliber staff and clients, especially nowadays. They're not only interested in numbers, but they're interested in working with or being associated with organizations that are being responsible in a number of areas. So all of these issues come together in understanding why this is an important topic for organizations to engage with. Now, even though organizations might want to take action, at least a lot of our clients face an obstacle in how to navigate a very complicated landscape and choosing the path that is right for them. There are many pieces of legislation. There's EU, there's non-EU legislation, there's national legislation, and there are also many voluntary standards, many reporting frameworks. So it can all seem very daunting. I've chosen here to just focus on a few key pieces of legislation that apply to organizations operating in the EU and are listed in the EU, and to just go over a few key sort of popular reporting frameworks just for reference. So starting off with the examples of relevant regulations, we've got the Non-Financial Reporting Directive. You may be familiar with this one. It's been in operation for a while, and it applies to companies which are have employees over 500 employees. They have to have a net turnover of over 40 million euro, and they need to be reporting on issues, and they need to be publicly listed, reporting on issues that are related to their human rights policies or their environmental impacts, so things that are not related to their financial practices. And this piece of legislation is now evolving into the CSRD, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. Now, this is expected to be adopted by the end of the year. We'll see if the EU keeps to that timeline. But what the CSRD does is it will increase the scope of companies that need to be reporting as compared to the Non-Financial Reporting Directive, and also increase the scope of information that organizations need to be reporting on. The ultimate aim is trying to make information comparable and concise. We also have the Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation, which applies to organizations operating in the financial services world. You may be familiar with this one. It's been applicable since March 2021. Organizations need to be reporting on whether they're taking sustainability into consideration in their investment decisions and what the impact of their investment decisions are. And finally, there's the EU taxonomy, which is slowly unfolding. Since January 2022, it's been applicable for all the organizations that fall under the scope of the Non-Financial Reporting Directive, and it will bring even more organizations and sectors into the fold as it unfolds. It seeks to create an EU-wide classification system for organizations to assess how environmentally sustainable their activities are across 6 environmental objectives. So there's these pieces of legislation, and many member states have additional legislation as well. And of course, there's a number of standards, and I've included here some of the most popular ones. Andrew touched on the GRI, the Global Reporting Initiative. You may also recognize the multicolored circle, which is the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. I've briefly touched on ISO 26000, and there are many, many more. So it's easy to understand why many clients may find this daunting, but you should not be discouraged, because any consultant will help you navigate your way and figure out what the best path for you is. Which brings me on to my next slide. And this was touched on in the video you just saw as well, which is how here at Kreston ITH, we embed sustainability ESG. Our first step, we do a gap analysis. Essentially, this is a due diligence exercise. We look at all the legislation I mentioned, any other legislation that might apply for your organization. We look at all the reporting standards and frameworks that you want to focus on, and we identify your data gaps and your compliance needs. And once we do that, we then need to undertake a materiality assessment. We need to identify which of those gaps and those needs are material, not just for the firm internally, so for the employees and board of directors, but also for many other stakeholders, your clients, your suppliers, your collaborators, your government bodies, the public, any entity or individual which is affected by the company but can be affected by the company. The ultimate aim to identify your material issues. And once you identify those material issues, you then go on to develop a strategy. Sorry, it's supposed to come up. Oh, there we go. You set actions, you set KPIs, you set targets so that you can address these material issues and you can improve your performance. And finally, you implement the strategy, you monitor your performance, and you report using any of these frameworks. And the ultimate goal being what Dan touched on in his video, achieving net zero. So achieving net zero greenhouse gas emissions, both for your direct impacts, but also for your indirect impacts across your supply chain. So lastly, my last slide, I've chosen to give a few tips for firms, regardless of where you might be on your sustainability journey. As I said in the video, for us, sustainability is a journey, and wherever you're at, you can always find things to improve on. So for firms starting out, for us, the most important thing is to create a baseline. As I previously mentioned, just identify what your gaps are, which of these gaps are material by engaging your stakeholders and set your actions and goals. Get started, like Dan said, in a strategy. Now, for firms who are further down the line, it's important in our opinion, to continuously be monitoring and improving your performance. And for this, you need to be providing your stakeholders with relevant education and skills so that they can improve their bit. You need to be achieving your net zero goals and also working with your suppliers across your supply chain to address their impacts, which you might not be able to control, but you can influence. And then lastly, for firms which are more advanced, for us, sustainability needs to become the ethos of the company. This needs to be embedded in the decision-making, in the policies, in the culture. It becomes second nature. And you need to be transparently reporting on how you're contributing to sustainable development and sharing all your learnings and your experience so you can move the needle for your sector. I know I'm a bit over time, so thank you all for listening. I hope you found this informative, and over back to you, Andrew.
Christina, thank you very much. No, you did very well on time, and I think your final point on your slide about building into the cultural ethos of an organisation is absolutely imperative to make this a success. So thank you. We're now going to move on to our second panelist, Dan Firmager from Kreston Reeves, who will talk to you about some of his experiences with the firm. Dan.
Thank you, Andrew. Hello, everyone. I'm Dan, and as Audit Assistant Manager and Climate Action Co-Lead at Kreston Reeves. Today, I'm here to talk to you as a bit of a case study of a firm that is starting their journey in the world of being an environmental business. So last year, we announced that we had achieved a carbon neutrality status, and we're not pretending to be the most environmentally friendly firm there is, but we hope to show a practical approach that others might be able to learn from. So, back in 2020, we set the target of being a carbon neutral organisation. To help with that, we appointed some independent experts called Anthesis. We gathered information internally, which actually was quite an exciting process, working across various teams that perhaps hadn't communicated with each other before, revealing all kinds of new relationships that eventually formed, and additional things came out from that. We then provided our information to Anthesis, who then provided us with an emissions breakdown by scope 1, 2, and 3. After we had that breakdown of our emissions, we had to source a company that would help us offset our emissions. We landed with Ecology, who purchase gold standard carbon credits on our behalf. So not all of you might be aware of what a carbon credit is, but a carbon credit is essentially an investment into a project or company that is doing something to reduce emissions from the atmosphere or ending up in the atmosphere. I thought it would be a good idea to share with you what our ecology profile looks like. As I mentioned, they're a B Corp organisation, which means that they have to adhere to very high standards of ESG accreditability. These are some of those projects that I referred to a moment ago. And in all of this, it's imperative that we're transparent about the whole thing. Christina was talking about this earlier. It's vital that you're transparent with all of your stakeholders. So on our website, we have published our emissions broken down by scope 1, 2, and 3. The hope is that other similar firms that in theory will have a very similar makeup of emissions will be able to access that data on our website, and without actually being able to go and find out what their total emissions are, they might be able to make some changes in areas that are most likely going to be significant to them. As you can see on this slide, our largest emissions are actually from scope 3. Scope 3 are the indirect emissions that are caused throughout your supply chain. So for instance, in the purchased goods and services that you might have. So that can be the investments that your employer pension contributions go into. There will be an aspect of a carbon footprint that is created from that. Also for real estate services, where you might not own a property freehold, actually it's leasehold, there is a carbon emission that links with that. So going forward, I briefly mentioned it earlier, but it's vital to understand the difference between carbon neutral and net zero. So what we have done as a firm is carbon neutral, which is the process of calculating your carbon emissions and paying to offset those using carbon credits, preferably gold standard. They're the highest accredited carbon credits that are available on the market. Net zero is the process of calculating those emissions, but setting science-based targets to reduce your emissions by 2050 by 90%. So as a firm, we know that carbon neutral is not yet enough, but it's a great start and we've got to start somewhere. As Christina said, it's actually a bit of a culture change and bringing everyone on that journey. So what we've found, carbon neutrality has been very good at starting to shift the thinking, the mindset of some people, and actually there's more interest in what's next. Can we look to go net zero? So the next stage is to explore being net zero. We're taking quite a practical approach with this. Obviously, I said that reducing emissions by 90% by 2050, that could have quite a detrimental impact on the way we operate as an organisation. So we don't want to make that commitment without understanding what the impact could be. So we're going to engage with consultants that are going to help us set a plan to be net zero. That all ties in with the fear of greenwashing. You might have heard of greenwashing, you might not, but essentially greenwashing is making false claims for the benefit of a marketing spin, which is something that we really want to avoid, and that's why it's vital to be as transparent about what you're doing as possible. Ultimately, we know we're in quite a unique position. We have many thousands of clients, and by doing something ourselves, we can engage in conversation with our clients to take them on the journey with us and start encouraging them to make change. Whilst it isn't the primary purpose, there's ultimately a good for brand element, as Christina mentioned earlier. Naturally, good press comes with this, and even the weekend just gone, Kreston Reeves were fortunate enough to win a sustainability award in recognition of the work that we've started doing to date. We also have ambitions of trying to align ourselves with the principles of a B Corp, which I briefly mentioned earlier. So, just some final thoughts I want to leave you with. Obviously, we are at the beginning of our journey, but we're very keen to engage in conversation, and I'm hoping that you might have learned something today or want to start that conversation yourself. I'm very happy to discuss further, whether that's LinkedIn, email, feel free to contact me. I've left a question there, what will you do? And I mentioned it in my video earlier, but if you are doing stuff, brilliant, carry on. If you haven't yet started, make that first step. I've certainly found that once you make that first step, things begin to snowball, things build up, and gradually you start to see real change starting to happen. So, without further ado, thank you very much for listening to me today. And I hope that you start your journeys very soon. Back over to you, Andrew.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Dan. And also thank you again to Christina. So I hope people that have been listening have felt inspired. Clearly, we had an engaged group before we started. The actual panel conversations, but now I actually want to go to the Q&A session. So this is your opportunity to ask either of our panelists questions about what you've either heard or seen this afternoon, or indeed perhaps where you are on your journey. I think both Dan and Christina have given you insights on how to start or progress your journeys. So this is very much meant to be an interactive, practical session. So as I said, there's a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, so do feel free to use it. But I think I just want to pick up on one of the points that was raised in the presentations from Christina, if I may, and actually it came up in the webinar we did this morning as well, similar one, about the increase in operational efficiencies and decrease in costs, because I expect there are some firms out there who are skeptical about, or perhaps see, oh gosh, is this another cost? At the end of the day, many of us are accountants and perhaps don't always look at things the right way off first of all. So I wondered if you could just share with us some thoughts on how you see sustainability and ESG increasing operational efficiency, Christina.
Sure. So I'll just take you back to the diagram I shared of ISO 26000, which covers what they call 7 core subjects. And this is just one of many standards, but I'll use that one just because I showed the diagram. Because there are all these areas that come under the umbrella term sustainability, which is why I thought it was important to define what sustainability means for us and how we approach it. We see it as a holistic framework. So if you're engaging on a number of issues, and trying to understand what your practices and policies are on things like your labor practices, your human rights policies, your governance practices, your environmental impacts, your consumer issues, your client issues, how you're engaging with the community you're operating with. There's so many subject areas, and by identifying all of these and trying to improve all of these, you are bound to gain operational efficiencies. There are so many different parts that make an organization work. And for us, sustainability, we see it as a holistic approach. It's a holistic framework. If you're trying to become more sustainable, to operate sustainably, to grow sustainably, you need to be improving on a number of areas and not just the E of ESG. And there's so many bits and pieces, and all of those together, you know, the sum of parts, it becomes bigger than itself. You can identify inefficiencies here, there, and everywhere. And in the process, we've seen with our clients, we've seen with ourselves, we are able to reduce our operating costs just because we've consolidated with it, you know, more efficient, more targeted, more concise, more comprehensive, people working together. It's just little wins that come together and become bigger than some of the parts. I don't know if that helps. Sorry, it's not very accounting worded because I'm not from the accounting background, but I hope it helps.
No, well, I was very impressed. 13 years experience, I think you said, Christina.
Yes, so that's the background, definitely not the accounting world.
Lovely, thank you. I've got a number of questions actually, so I'm going to move on. The ISO 26000 that you mentioned can be certified, or only that standard has directions to follow? Is that right?
It's guidelines to follow. It can be verified. So it's not like 14,001, if you're familiar with that, or 9,001. It can only be verified.
And so as a follow-up question, actually, another question that's come through on the same area,
sure,
is could this therefore be the initial plan on which to base a sustainability journey? Would you recommend that or not?
Sure. I like it because, as I said, it touches on a number of areas. So it makes it very easy to assess your organization and just see how sustainable you are in a number of areas. And it's also very easy to identify gaps. So I would definitely recommend it as a first step to engage and understand.
And are there any other sort of areas that you would recommend that people starting on their journey actually look at?
Other standards, you mean?
Yeah, standards, yes.
Sure. I mean, there are very many. So a very, very popular one is GRI, but that's more of a reporting framework. Even so, it does give you guidelines. The materiality assessment aspect is sort of common across all standards and reporting frameworks. So GRI does tell you how to conduct a materiality assessment, how to engage with your stakeholders, which is also a very good way in starting out. And trying to sort of engage with these issues and see which are the most important that you need to be addressing imminently. That would be a good one. Some of the other ones are more corporate, so science-based targets tend to be for larger firms. The UN Sustainable Development Goals are also very widely used. The problem with those, for me at least, they're a bit more, it's not a problem, it's just they're wider in their scope. So it's a bit more difficult for companies starting out to sort of define them for their organization, but they are a useful context. I think GRI probably and ISO 26000 for me are the ones that provide the best scope to begin with.
Fine, thank you. Dan, is there anything you wanted to add, not necessarily from a standards point of view or regulatory, but just general to form an initial plan?
I think it's just about being aware of what's going on around you. Use examples within the network or use examples of other companies that you know around you that have done something that you think, wow, they're doing a lot. Don't feel like you're alone in the process, and do reach out for help is the only advice I'd add, really.
And I think what's great is, I mean, a number of Kreston Global firms are well versed in this area, and so people can reach out to those people to help on that journey. Dan, I'm going to stick with you on another question that's come in, please, based on your presentation. You included a slide showing our score as around 1600. What is a good score, and where are the firm aiming to get to for 22-23?
So, very difficult question to answer on what is a good score, because it's all dependent on the industry you're in. And as a services firm, obviously we don't manufacture anything, and generally our emissions will be lower than a company that does manufacture something, as an example. In terms of where we're aiming to get for 22-23, the difficulty we had, and I'll be very honest about this, the difficulty we had in the last financial year, on which those stats are based, is that it was COVID year, and the level of commuting had fallen significantly. Even the amount of water and electricity or gas we used fell significantly in comparison to what it would have been as people were working from home. And under the current standards, you don't incorporate the emissions produced by people working from home. So 22-23, I wouldn't be too surprised if we saw a slight increase. We have started changing all of our electricity and gas to be from renewable or carbon offset sources. So we'll see a reduction in potentially our Scope 1 emissions, but the commuting side of things might increase things. So I'm expecting 22-23 to be more of a true indication of what our carbon emissions are in a normal year.
Fine, thank you. Just going through other questions. It's been hard to work out how to prioritize reducing carbon. I think businesses are worried about greenwashing. I'm going to come back to that in a moment, by lack of knowledge rather than purposefully leading. Are there any pitfalls or advice in order to avoid greenwashing? Christina, is that something you would like to pick up?
Sure. So very simple. don't say something or don't advertise something you're not doing. Don't try to embellish what you're doing. Just stick to the truth. It's all about transparency and accountability. Even if you're starting out, that's still very positive. It doesn't have to be bigger than it is. Both Dan and I have, mentioned again and again, it's a journey. So, avoid greenwashing, but just being truthful and accountable to your stakeholders. That would be my advice.
Dan, do you want to add to that? Because we've got another question, and I probably should have asked them the other way around, where greater explanation on what greenwashing is, although I quite like Christina's simplicity about being truthful.
So I agree with what Christina says. I think it's also important, if you're thinking, if there's slight doubt in your mind before you're about to publish something, that what you're about to publish might not be the truth, or might not be entirely correct, then go and do the research first. Go and understand whether what you're saying is correct. Just don't publish anything that you're not too sure about, because there are a lot of people and a lot of interested parties that have great knowledge in this area now, and they will understand it and they will come back at you with a question. And even if what you are saying is correct, you can still have people come and ask you questions. And only once you've understood yourself what it is that you're saying, you can then answer their questions, if that makes sense.
I think it does. And I think a follow-up to that is that I think increasingly our clients and society that we work in are going to ask more questions. And I'm going to say turn to us either formally, as Christina was talking about, or perhaps informally for guidance and advice as they go through their own journeys, as well as us as Kreston firms. So I think that's quite important. Just got a couple of minutes left for the Q&A session. Christina, back to you. What was your biggest learning point on the journey? And are there any pitfalls or things to avoid?
The biggest learning. I think I'm constantly learning, even being so active in this space for so long. It's a very dynamic, a very robust environment. It's constantly changing. The compliance landscape is evolving. You've got the EU regulations, you've got your national regulations, you've got whatever else is happening elsewhere. You need to be constantly engaging and not being on top of things to be able to respond. So I guess my biggest learning is that I need to be constantly learning. I can't just sit back and say I know everything now, because then I won't be able to be compliant and I won't be able to be sustainable. So that would be my one thing. Now, in terms of pitfalls, I think I'm going to go back to being truthful and being accountable. I think nowadays it's very important to have a very strong relationship with your stakeholders to build trust. It's very difficult to build trust, but very easy to destroy it. You want to build a brand value. You have a brand value, as firms, Kreston firms, we have a brand, we have, integrity. We don't want to bring that down by sort of, engaging, saying we're doing things that we're not doing, or giving advice to clients that is not truthful and accurate. So for me, I guess the biggest pitfall is be aware of what you're putting out there.
And Dan, comments you on this point. I mean, I think Christina's just reiterated something you said 5 minutes ago, but that's great. Other points you would say?
Obviously, everything Christina said, I agree with. But I would say that obviously I trained as an accountant. I'm a chartered accountant. I trade in audit. This was a passion of mine, but don't just go along with the flow. Even when you're taking advice from people that have trained in this area, try and understand it for yourself. Make sure that you're not just being led up the wrong path. And I was very keen to make sure that I'd read and understood what it is that we were engaging in.
Very good advice. I have got one final question before we finish the Q&A session. And how do we encourage clients to change? What are the first 3 steps for them? Dan, please kick off.
Make them understand the opportunity that there is. Obviously, Christine has spoken about ways that actually you can reduce costs sometimes, but they can almost, and this is where the greenwashing and being careful with how you're coming across, they can reduce costs, but actually you can market that as a employable, as a responsible employer and good for brand element. But use practical examples of other businesses that might have done good work before is the second piece of advice that I give. It's always good to not just make claims and then not support it with an example of where it's worked well. And then give them names of those that could help them. I think it's always very difficult for clients to just listen to the story and then think, wow, that's great. But then you leave them and they have no idea what they're supposed to do next. So give them the names or a suggestion of what they should do next to begin their journey.
Christina, anything you want to add to that?
Sure. I would say that you need to figure out the driver that, or the drivers that work most for that specific client to get them engaged. And then for me, it's all about developing a methodology that's bespoke to their needs so that it feels tailored to their culture and their operations and their practices, and so that they can, engage with it more and make it their own. And that feels more part of how they're doing things, then they're more likely to succeed in actually implementing. It's all nice and great to develop a strategy, but then if the firm doesn't go on to implement it and actually do the work, then that's it, it's lost. So it's very, very important for me when working with clients to have them understand, like Dan says, make them feel that it's their own, make them feel that it's feasible, and then give them the encouragement they need to sort of do the work and implement it so that they can see real change.
It's fantastic. I'm hearing transparency, openness, empathy, and truthfulness, as you've both said a number of occasions. So fantastic. So that's the end of our Q&A session. Thank you both very, very much. Well, thank you for the audience for asking so many great questions, and thank you to Christina and Dan for providing such thorough answers, which is great. So just as we enter the final sort of 10 minutes of this webinar, I mentioned earlier Treedom. So Treedom is an organization who Kreston Global have partnered with on their sustainability journey, and they've actually bought a forest with Treedom to contribute towards offsetting the carbon made by the Madrid conference. And we now have a short video to show about them.
Hay organizaciones como las nuestras que estamos en capacidad de desarrollar estos proyectos que tienen mucho más que la simple siembra de un arbolito para que crezca, sino que afecta a todas las personas para que puedan aprender a reforestar.
Fantastic. So thank you very much. So just a short insight into the work that Treedom do, and working with Kreston Global on there. So again, before I let you go, it would be wrong not to have another poll question. And this is basically following on from the first one. But after today's webinar, are you more or less likely to consider a firm ESG strategy, with 1 not being at all likely and 10 being very likely to? So again, just give you a few seconds to answer that. Okay, so again, we're seeing lots of positivity about people wanting to engage further in looking at ESG and sustainability as we go forward. So that's great. So I think today has been a huge success in that area, both, and we had a similar results from this morning. So really, we're into the last sort of few minutes of the webinar, and again, I'd just like to thank the panelists, Christina and Dan, for their insights and all the work that they are doing. I would encourage people, whether you're starting or have started or are developing, to reach out to either Dan or Christina, or either the two panelists from this morning from Singapore and also India. I think Christina summed it up, where you have to be constantly learning. You have to be constantly open-minded. I see Dan nodding as well, and I think that's really important. We're all evolving as organizations, and I think we're all working out how we effectively perhaps move from some traditional thinkings of organizations, which are perhaps more profit-focused, but to looking at sustainability and building into that. And I think it's great when you hear examples of how it's working for the firms to actually get a combination of the two together being successful, not only for the organization itself, but its people, its suppliers, and society in general. So we hope that many of you will be at the World Conference in Madrid next month. On the Friday afternoon at that conference, there will be a session on Kreston Futures and the journey to sustainability. So why it's integral to our purposes and learning from our member firms and how to develop a sustainable strategy. So again, if you're going there, please do continue this conversation when you're in Madrid. And I also hope that following not only these sessions today, but also the Madrid conference, that there will be an appetite to develop this further within Kreston Global going forward. So again, thank you all very, very much for joining us this webinar. And also thank you again to Christina and Dan. Goodbye.